Hey everyone, and welcome back. Today we are taking a deep dive into something I'm sure we've all thought about at some point. What's the deal with immersive tech? Like, why isn't it really taking off the way we thought it would? We've got AR, VR, the metaverse. Everyone's always saying it's the future, but why isn't everyone using it?
Right.
Well, today we're going beyond the hype with this really insightful blog post from a developer who's been in the AR/VR game for years, and they've been grappling with this exact question.
Mhm.
And lucky for us, they lay out some really interesting pitfalls to watch out for.
And these aren't just, technical glitches or anything. What we're going to be talking about is how we even think about immersive tech can actually be holding it back
Totally.
from going mainstream.
It's like this weird paradox where sometimes being too cutting edge can backfire.
Right.
The author actually calls this pitfall innovation for innovation's sake.
Okay.
And honestly, I've been guilty of falling into this trap myself. You think if something is new and flashy, it's automatically better.
Yeah.
But this blog post really made me realize it's way more nuanced than that.
Because new doesn't automatically equal useful
Yeah,
or even usable, right?
exactly.
Like one of the points the author makes is that when developers are so focused on like pushing the boundaries, of technology, they sort of forget about the user experience, especially for people who are totally new to AR or VR. Like they assume that because the creators, are comfortable with the technology, that everyone else will be too.
It's like trying to explain astrophysics to someone who's never even looked through a telescope.
Exactly.
And and this leads to a whole other issue that the author brings up, which is lower than expected usage.
Okay.
They were saying that when these companies, they see their fancy new tech isn't getting the adoption rates they'd hoped for, so they jump to adding even more features instead of trying to figure out why the initial experience wasn't good enough, why it wasn't sticky enough.
It becomes a cycle of complexity.
Yeah.
They keep adding all these bells and whistles, but they haven't thought about like the fundamental issue of user empathy. They're so deep in the weeds of what is technologically possible that they kind of lose sight of what's actually meaningful for the person on the other end.
Okay, that is, says CH, a good point. And they gave this great anecdote in the post about, it was an AR project back in 2011.
Okay.
And at the time, the author was convinced the reason it wasn't a massive hit was that the tech just wasn't cool enough yet.
Right.
But looking back on it, they realized it wasn't about how futuristic the tech seemed. It was about whether people actually understood how to use it and why they would even want to.
Exactly. And the author, they use this phrase content as a differentiator, which I think it's really relevant in today's landscape.
Yeah.
When you think about it, we have all these different headsets, platforms, tools, everything popping up, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how do you stand out?
Yeah.
And it's easy to get, sidetracked by trying to go for the most groundbreaking, complex experience. But if it's too difficult to grasp or it doesn't actually like solve a real need for the user, then all that innovation is basically for nothing.
Yeah. It's like they say, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And they had this awesome example in the blog post about Universal Studios.
Oh.
For their 100th anniversary, they did this really simple AR campaign. And all it was you would hold your phone up to a DVD cover, and then the characters would come to life.
Yeah.
Nothing fancy, just pure visual storytelling.
Simple.
But effective.
And it worked because they understood their audience.
Oh, really?
And what they wanted, which is a fun, easy way to interact with characters that they already loved. It wasn't about pushing the boundaries of AR technology. It was about delivering a really delightful experience that anyone could access.
Yeah.
Sometimes simplicity is way more powerful than complexity.
Totally.
Yeah.
So to sum up this first pitfall, it's not enough to just have cool tech.
Right.
You have to really think about who you're making it for, what they need, and how you can deliver value without overwhelming them.
Don't get so caught up in being cutting edge that you forget about the human on the other side of the screen.
Yes.
Okay, ready to unpack the second pitfall. This one is a bit sneakier.
Hit me with it. I'm ready for more.
So the second pitfall the author talks about is this idea of the expert's curse. Have you ever heard of that?
Not exactly. Is it like when you're so good at something that you forget what it's like to be a beginner?
That's a great way to put it. In the context of immersive tech, the expert's curse is this gap between what's possible for, say, a seasoned VR developer with years of experience
Right.
versus what's actually achievable for someone who's just starting out, right? Like the experts can create these mind-blowing experiences, but they're working with this whole level of knowledge and specialized tools that most people just don't have access to.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm guessing that makes it hard to get those wow moments that really hook people on a new technology, right?
Exactly. The author brings up this really interesting point about replicability. Just because an expert can build something amazing doesn't mean that the average person can go out and recreate that experience themselves. Even if they have, the same VR headset or AR app.
Oh, they had a perfect example of this in the blog post. It was about hand tracking in VR.
Oh,
I
yeah.
remember reading that and thinking, okay, this sounds cool, but how on earth would I ever make something like that?
Right. The author was working on this project that really pushed the limits of hand tracking technology,
Mm.
and people were blown away by the demos.
Yeah.
But then those same people would go home all excited to try it out on their own
Yeah.
and nothing. They couldn't replicate those experiences because the tools and the learning curve were just too complex.
So it's almost like this catch-22. Like you need those wow moments to get people excited about the tech, but those moments are often created using tools and techniques that are like way too advanced for most people. So
Yeah.
what's the solution?
Well, the author argues that companies need to do a much better job of kind of bridging that gap. Like it's not enough to just create powerful tools.
Mm.
You also need to make those tools accessible.
Right.
They talk about the importance of things like tutorials, templates, clear documentation,
Yeah, yeah.
like resources that can help people of all skill levels go from, I have no idea what I'm doing, to, hey, I made something cool.
So it's kind of like if you want someone to learn how to bake, you don't just hand them a bag of flour and point them to a professional kitchen. You give them a recipe, some basic instructions, maybe even some pre-measured ingredients to get them started.
Exactly. And I think that's something that often gets overlooked in the tech world, especially with something as new and rapidly evolving as immersive technology. There's this assumption that people will just figure it out.
Right.
But the reality is that most of us need a bit more guidance than that.
Okay, so we've talked about the importance of user empathy and making sure the technology is actually usable. And now we're adding accessibility into the mix. So it's not just about what the tech can do, it's about who can use it and what they can create with it.
Yeah.
I'm sensing a theme here. But before we move on, there's one more point from the blog post I want to make sure we hit. It's kind of a subtle one, but it really got me thinking about the bigger picture of immersive tech. They asked this question: has AR content really changed that much since the early days? What do you make of that?
Yeah, it makes you think, right, like we can do some pretty cool things now,
Yeah,
but is it really that different from what people were already imagining back then?
exactly.
Yeah.
And they use that example in the blog post.
Yeah.
Seeing a T-Rex walking down the street in AR.
Yeah, they were doing that back in 2012.
Right. And it's still a wow moment.
It is.
So what's changed? If it's not the core concept, what's making these experiences more impressive now?
Well, it's everything that's happening sort of behind the scenes, The point the author makes is that, yeah, the AR content itself, like that T-Rex walking down the street,
Right.
might be conceptually similar,
Yeah.
but the technology powering it
Yeah.
has evolved like crazy.
Okay.
Massive leaps in processing power. The sensors in our phones and headsets are so much more sophisticated.
Got it.
And don't even get me started on the software advancements, right? It all has to work together seamlessly.
So like the T-Rex is still cool.
Yeah.
But now it looks even more realistic because our phones can handle it.
Exactly. And we don't even realize a lot of the time how much is going on in the background to make these experiences actually feel natural.
Right.
Immersive. Like take spatial awareness, for example.
Okay.
Our devices can actually understand the geometry of the room,
Wow.
place those virtual objects right in the environment, and they're accurately placed.
Yeah.
Or light estimation.
Oh,
It adjusts the lighting of those virtual objects to match, the real world. Oh, wow.
that's how you get that seamless blend of virtual and real. I mean, these advancements might not be the flashy headlines,
Right.
but they're what separates a kind of gimmicky AR experience from something really impressive.
Yeah, it's like the difference between watching a movie with really cheesy special effects
Holy.
and one where you completely forget you're even looking at CGI. It's the subtle details that really make it.
It is. And those details are only possible because we've had these incredible advancements in hardware.
Right.
And I think the author's point is that we kind of take those for granted sometimes.
Yeah, we do.
But they're the foundation for building really innovative AR and VR experiences.
Okay, so as we kind of wrap up this deep dive then, it feels like there's this overarching theme of, we really need to be focusing on the fundamentals.
Yeah.
We can't get so caught up in chasing the next big thing
Right,
that
yeah.
we forget about things like good design, user experience, accessibility.
It's all important.
Yeah,
And I think we also need to appreciate how far hardware has come.
right. Sometimes the biggest changes aren't the ones that we see right away, but they're pushing the boundaries of what our devices can even do.
It's a good reminder to stay curious,
Definitely.
keep asking those questions,
Always be exploring.
and never lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Well, this has been awesome. Huge thanks to our expert for breaking all of this down.
Oh, of course. Happy to be here.
It's given me a whole new perspective on the world of immersive tech, I'll tell you that.
Glad to hear it.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll catch you next time.